to amplify in a disruptive economy, a leader's perspective. Our moderator, the favorite, Miss Shereen Bhan, Editor-in-Chief, CNBC TV 18. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. Joining her on stage, we have Mr. Dinesh Malkani, President, Cisco India. Mr. Rishad Premji, Chief Strategy Officer, Wipro Limited, and Mr. Rajiv Bajaj, Managing Director, Bajaj Auto. There you go, ladies and gentlemen, this power-packed panel, all set to give you the CEO's perspective.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having us here and giving us this opportunity to talk about simplifying and amplifying business strategies. The overarching theme at the NASSCOM Leadership Forum is reimagine, don't re-engineer. Well, this is my 13th year at the NASSCOM Leadership Forum, so I guess I should be doing something right, so I shouldn't either reimagine or re-engineer. Why fix it if it broke? So the gentlemen here are going to have to do all the heavy lifting. I'm pretty much going to do what I usually do when I am here. Let me broadly articulate for you how we're going to run this. We have two presentations. Dinesh and Rajiv are both going to make 10-minute presentations setting up what they believe is the strategy as far as simplification is concerned. And then we'll have a Q&A, and I'll throw it open to the audience as well to take this conversation forward. You know, over the past day and a half that you've been here, you've probably heard a lot about the uncertainty that faces the Indian IT sector, about the Trump times and what an executive order may or may not mean for the H-1B visa regime and so on and so forth. So I guess whether it's 2016 or 2017, uncertainty is something that this industry in specific has learned to live with. So how do you ensure that somebody else doesn't actually control your destiny? How do you ensure that you continue to steer your ship the way that you want it without somebody else doing that for you? I think that is going to be the sum and substance of the conversation that we hope to have here today. And I think it goes back to the business fundamentals. It starts with asking and answering the question, what do you stand for, what your purpose is, and what you want to do? And I think everything else follows from that. So be clear about the problem that you're hoping to solve, and then be clear about the internal structure that you want to run and the external structure. I think there has to be a symmetry of information so that you're agile both internally as well as externally. And I think what is also important, especially in the uncertain times that we live in today, is the art of making sacrifices. I think companies very often want to do everything, want to be in every market, want to be in every geography, in every service. I think time has now come to align your competence with your capabilities and talk about where you want to place your bets in the future. So not betting on everything that you think you should be doing, but betting on what you believe you can truly add value to. I think those are some questions that CEOs today need to answer. So without further ado, we're kicking off our session with Rajiv, and I believe he has an interesting presentation for us. So Rajiv, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have not been here as often as, or I have not been invited here as often as Shereen has been, but it's my 7th or 8th time, so I feel pretty much at home. And in that context, I will take the liberty of starting off by being a little rude. I made a little presentation. It's no more than 5 slides, but it has not been easy to do so because, in my opinion, the theme of the session, Simplify, is at loggerheads with the theme of the summit, which is reimagine to re-engineer. Because for the life of me, I don't know what that means. Now, I was not here yesterday, you guys were here. So when all the biggies spoke yesterday, I wonder if anybody cared to elaborate. What does it mean? How can you reimagine without re-engineering? Because as far as I'm concerned, engineering is a big part of reimagination, and imagination is a big part of engineering. But sometimes what happens in my company happens in your organization. The people who organize things to make it look impressive come up with these big words that mean very little. So assuming that okay, that emboldens me now. So So anyway, as I started preparing, I was told that you must not say anything that is Bajaj Auto specific. Now, the Bajaj Auto I walked into 25 years ago was known as a company that made low-cost scooters, and almost all of which was sold only in this market. The Bajaj Auto that I am part of today, 25 years later, I would like to believe is known as a company that makes high-tech motorcycles, and almost half of which are exported across the world, including to the US, to Europe, Japan, etc. So while I will say no more about Bajaj Auto, but my management approach at Bajaj has been driven by my two passions for homeopathy and for yoga. So I am going to really go out on a limb here and talk to you about the science of homeopathy and the practice of yoga, and more specifically about 7 principles I learned, especially from homeopathy, that have helped me do my job better. So is there any doctors in the audience here? Only one. So just hold your silence so that whatever I say, they have to accept it. Okay, let's go further. Next slide, please. See, I like to start, since the theme is simplification, what do we need to do as managers? A, there is a problem we need to recognize. B, we have to analyze the problem. C, we have to find a solution. And D, we have to implement the solution. It's as simple as that. Now, let me tell you what I believe is the analogy between homeopathy and management. A good homeopath deals with patient symptoms as much as we as managers deal with business failures. That is our meaning of the problem. Both of us make sometimes, as a patient and as a manager, we make the mistake of assuming the problem is because of the outside world. I am sure yesterday you have only talked about Trump and Brexit. This is like a patient telling a doctor, I am not well because I have swine flu, because of the virus. But the patient does not ask himself why the neighbor or the colleague who is smelling the same air doesn't have the problem. He doesn't realize he has swine flu because his immunity is weak. It has less to do with the virus, it has more to do with his vitality. In the same way, why is it in the aviation sector, a sector which is known to be very difficult, Indigo does so well, for example, and Kingfisher does so badly? I jokingly tell people it is because in Kingfisher there is no business model, there are only models. But having said, the point I'm trying to make is we have to look inside before we look outside. Analysis. There is a concept called the three-legged stool with which the homeopath tries to understand the patient, because he's not trying to solve the symptom. He's trying to heal the patient. So he looks at his mental, emotional condition, he looks at his general condition, and then he looks at the specific symptom. We also have to do that as managers. I think too often we take a one-dimensional view. We only look at the customer, or only look at the competition, or only think about ourselves and forget the marketplace. It doesn't work like this. The solution. The most important thing in homeopathy is to find what is it in that person that makes the person that person who he is. In other words, what does he have in uncommon with others, not what he has in common with others. I think that should be, as Shereen said, the purpose of every business, to ask ourselves, what is unique about us? Otherwise, there is no reason for us to exist. So what is that D factor, the differentiator, that we bring to the marketplace? And finally, in terms of implementation, the reality is, implementation is an ongoing process of improvement. In homeopathy, it is called posology, how you give one dose after the other to the patient. You don't give it mechanically like in allopathy. Take this for 5 days, 3 times a day. It doesn't work like that. You say, take one dose, come back to me after 1 week, we'll talk again. I think it's the same in management. You take an initiative or you start something and you review it and you improve it as you go along. So to me, it made a lot of sense to strike this comparison. Next, please. Now, if management at the end of the day, simplistically speaking, is about an idea and an implementation, here are 3 principles I'd like to share with you of homeopathy as far as ideas go that I found to be very useful. The first principle and the most important principle is that of individualization. As I said, what makes me who I am is who I am. For example, in Bajaj Auto's case, we are a motorcycle manufacturer. It's not unique to be a motorcycle manufacturer, but we are neither vertically organized, as some of our competition is, i.e. brands like BMW, Ducati, KTM, nor are we horizontally organized, or in fancier words, we don't have a horizontal architecture like a Honda or Yamaha does with 200 brands out there. We have a diagonal architecture, 10 brands, starting with a brand called Boxer we sell in Africa for no more than $350, to the brand KTM we sell in developed markets for as much as 10 times that price. And despite addressing this entire spectrum, we are able to deliver a 22% EBITDA, which is like double the industry standard at the end of the day. So there is something unique, something individualized about our business model that helps us to do that. Which means that an idea that is good for Honda or TVS is no good for me, just as something that is good for Pepsi is no good for Coke, or something that's good for Infosys is no good for TCS, especially in recent times. This is very, very important. I think often when managers think about ideas, immediately benchmark karo. Dusra aadmi kya kar raha hai dekho. No. Benchmarking is to understand what not to do. It is not to understand what to do. The second is holism. Very often we become like 5 blind men on the elephant. Everybody is talking about a different part of the elephant. It's easier said than done. Let me give you a small example out of Bajaj Auto. Thanks to all our productivity improvements, we found ourselves in a position 10 years back when we had thousands of excess people, labor, who didn't have the skills to make the motorcycles we wanted to make. What do you do with that? As you can imagine, that's a huge cost to carry in every sense. And everyone said to me that you can't get rid of labor in this country. Everybody knows that very well. You can't fire people. That to a big prominent company like Bajaj, it's out of the question. You'll never get permission. What did we do? We told each person that your take-home salary till day of retirement, we will keep depositing in your bank account, but please go home, play with your grandchildren, let us make the motorcycles. They all took the VRS, they all went home. So if you take a holistic view of a situation, I think every problem can be solved. And the third is vitality. Yoga teaches us, especially if you follow the 8 petals of yoga, to strengthen our immune system from within. It's like saying if you have an accident and God forbid you break your leg, your first port of call is not going to be to use a walking stick. You're going to do physiotherapy and strengthen yourself. In our case, we made a lot of scooters at one time, but our R&D was a big zero. Don't go and tell my father this, otherwise I'll lose my inheritance. But this is my opinion anyway. And the answer to not having an R&D doesn't mean you go and sell something cheap. The answer to not having an R&D is not to go and engage a consultant. The answer to not having an R&D is to develop your own capability. And I started long time back in 96 with 4 young engineers to do that. So individualization, holism, and vitality are the 3 fundamental principles that guide ideation at our company. Next, please. Finally, in terms of execution, because ideas have to be executed. On the top left, there is a picture taken by a photographer of a child almost starving to death. I think it was in Ethiopia, and a vulture waiting to make a meal out of that. Imagine, if you were a little upset this morning because your coffee was cold or your car was brushed against by someone else and you're somewhat irritated, and if I tried to make light of it, it would irritate you some more. But if I show you this picture, the grief that is there in this picture will completely subsume what you feel within you. In other words, it's a principle of homeopathy that like cures like. Opposites don't cure. Like cures like. So greater grief quells lesser grief. Bajaj Auto, for example, could never export. Till 12, 13 years back, if you look at our balance sheet, you will see our exports were zero. Today, as I said earlier, the sun doesn't set on an Indian motorcycle because we export from everywhere from Japan to the West Coast. This happened because we sought to follow the principle of like cures like. First, we went to neighboring markets. From there, we went to a little more challenging market, etc. And using this approach, we brought ourselves to a position where we can be a global maker. On the top right is a picture of my doing yoga when I had hurt my back. And Guruji Iyengar in Pune told me to stand on my head, in other words, Sirsasana. But he told me, in one asana, you should find all the asanas. You can stand on your head, which is an inverted pose. You can stretch your legs forward. You can stretch them sideways. You can twist them. You can bend them. You can see that in one thing, there is everything. To me, the Pulsar motorcycle was an example of one thing being everything. Because through the Pulsar, we changed everything in the company. The R&D skills, the engineering skills, the production skills, the cost structure, the marketing, the sales, the distribution, the service standards, everything changed. So CEOs are sometimes notorious about, they go to a new conference every week and come back with a new idea and confuse people every week with that. You have to stay with one thing, but you don't have to feel insecure कि one thing ही करेगा तो क्या होगा. अरे वो one thing में सब कुछ होना चाहिए. In homeopathy, it is called all the locals must be present in that global, and the global must be present in all the locals. This is very important, I think, for good implementation. At the bottom left, the story of Hans Christian Andersen, my favorite story, favorite fairy tale of the child. It takes a child sometimes to say that the emperor is naked, which means if the solution, if the idea is right, it will go like a hot knife through butter. Even if you give a small dose, if your idea is not working, i.e., for example, demonetization, don't blame execution. That means your idea itself is wrong. So in the same way, for example, when we set up our new plants in the last 10 years in Uttarakhand and in Maharashtra, our thought was that girls should work on the assembly line. Now for you, this may not be a radical concept, but in the auto industry, it's a pretty radical concept. We started 10 years back, and today I'm proud to tell you, last month when Bajaj rolled out its biggest motorcycle ever, a 400cc Dominar, it was rolled off a assembly line that was manned only by girls. So it's an all-girl assembly line that made that. So if the idea is good, it works. And finally, potentize repetition. Every time you must raise the bar a little bit. You see a whole range of pulsars there, from the very first one to the last one. So it's not that you get from one level to the next level in one jump. Everybody knows Rome is not built in a day. We must take those measured steps. As you have done so successfully over the last 20 years, you have taken India to the world like that. We are also trying to do it in our own way. With that, I come to the last slide. So if things are simple, then we have less and less to do. And this great man, I don't know how to pronounce his name, he has said, less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. Please don't take pictures of this because I don't know what this means. But you have to end with a very profound slide. So I'm ending with this. But actually what Einstein said is more relevant. If you cannot explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Rajiv. Unique it certainly was, Rajiv's presentation, and I think it brought up a lot of the issues that I touched upon at the start of our conversation, looking inside, not outside, the D factor, what differentiates you from everybody else, your uniqueness, and of course the idea of holism, which basically means that align all your operations, the front end, the back end, the customer, with your internal structure. And I won't go down the demonetization route. I'm not taking that bait, Rajiv. But Dinesh, Malkani, you're up next, and your time starts now.
All right, thank you very much. Well, when Shereen said Rajiv will present first, I said, oh my God, that's a really hard act to follow. Rajiv, that was an amazing story, right? So I'm also going to talk about a story today. I'm not going to talk about products and technology. I want to talk about our journey. It's been 3 years. I remember 3 years ago, we were going through a lot of uncertainty, and there were certain things we did, and I wanted to share that with you, right? So the first thing that was happening about 3 years ago, that customers' expectations were changing. I could sense in conversations that a little bit of that paranoia was sinking in that, oh my God, things may get disrupted. But it was just the beginning. I came back and looked at my own organization and I said, if things change in the market, is my talent ready? Are people ready to be able to move along with it, right? Like any organization, we were seeing competitors that were coming up from unexpected places. And what's interesting is that all of them had great stories. They were unproven, but stories were great. And when you're unproven, you can be bold, because you can say anything you want to say, right? Obviously, like any large organization, P&L pressures were there. And the big question was, will India grow, or what's going to happen to India? And everybody wanted a different business model. When I would meet my customers, the first conversation would be, don't come and sell me these boxes. I'm not going to pay you. I want it as a subscription. I want it outcome-based. What is your skin in the game? All the terms that were being coined around consultants were being thrown at us, right? And the macroeconomic situation was a little bit uncertain. But this is where we began, and we had two choices at that time. And I think which is a choice that we almost have to make every day. One is be cozy and comfortable, because when you're a large business, steering the ship can be very challenging, very difficult. One is be comfortable, but the threat is you'll get disrupted, you'll get commoditized. Or go on the front foot and disrupt. And I think the choice we obviously chose was we wanted to disrupt. But it's easier said than done. I can tell you at that point in time, and I think Shereen mentioned this very correctly, is that you can't take too many bets. You really have to quantify what you want to do. But we decided to put the stake in the ground, and we said we're going to do something bold. We are going to go out and take some bets, and we're going to execute them well. We had to create a risk-taking culture within the organization. Every time I think about that 3 years ago, I'll tell you it applies today as well. If you don't have a bold plan in the front, you will get commoditized, you will get disrupted. So we got our teams together and we put up this infographic. This was built in 2014, where we said that India has put, and I tweeted this out, by the way, it was a show that I did with Shereen and CNBC, but we said that India, by 2018 or 2020, will be the most digitized country in the world. I can tell you at that time, there were very few believers that India will move at that pace. Our teams came together and looked at how many people move from villages into urban areas. And if that is a reality, and if that trend continues, how are the cities going to be able to take that? And can smart cities, the dream vision, become reality? We started looking at the number of people that were using mobile phones and what were they using it for, and will India turn the curve and become a hyper-connected society? How will education get offered? How will healthcare sort of services be offered? So we put all this together and we created this chart. And I think the decision at that time was, should we bet on this? Because sometimes if you have a trend you think will take 5 years to achieve, should you be betting on it? So we decided to talk to our customers. And I know this sounds very basic, but I'll tell you, business fundamentals never change. But this was a different kind of conversation. It was not a conversation on, well, here are my solutions and this is how I can help you. It was a conversation on what were they seeing. And I found that, the power of collective minds is phenomenal. But we learned a lot. We had hundreds of conversations. We had conversations with government, state government, with consultants, customers, all of that, teachers, all of that put together. And what emerged out of it was trends. We spotted trends that I feel good about, the fact that nobody in the industry spotted as early as we did. And actually, this has been a philosophy we learned from our chairman, John Chambers, right? He always was spotting trends ahead of time. Actually, I think it was in 96 or 97 when he said, voice will become free. It was great to listen to, Mr. Mukesh Ambani yesterday, where that has become a reality. He said, video will be the new voice. And if you look at the amount of video that flows on our network, it's almost 75 to 80%. He said that's the way people will learn, live, and play. And so we started to listen to our customers in India, and we spotted some trends. And I'll tell you, this applies to everyday business. If you can put the effort in spotting the trend for the future and get it right, that's a winning formula. But like Rajiv said, one is the trend, but what about the execution? You can have the best idea. It begins inside the organization. It begins with the people. So the first thing we did was looked at our people, and before that looked at our own practices. Frankly, we are not believers of this pyramid org structure. We killed it from all the presentations that we were making. It was about creating small teams, high impact. And why is that important? It is important because in business today, if you want to avoid disruption, if you want to avoid being commoditized, you have to have agility. The only way you can have agility when your numbers are fairly big is you create small teams, you interconnect them together and move them around as time goes by. We have followed this practice. I think almost 60 to 70% of my people in the last 3 years are in new jobs, new roles. Some of them rotate out every year. What I also found that was in India, people want to learn. They want to experience new channels. And it was one way also to keep the teams very motivated in a hyper-competitive market. Got in a lot of diversity into the team. Diversity is not just gender, it was age, younger organization. and brought people from all over the country. We tend to hire a lot in the metros, but I'll tell you, the talent in all the other cities is amazing. The hunger to succeed and be successful was absolutely amazing. So people was a big strategy for us, and it's not just about you doing that in your own organization. We talked about simplicity, but also amplification. You have to take that best practice and put it into your partner organizations, because that's how you'll be able to scale very effectively. The other thing was around innovation. Easier said than done. While our company innovates, we knew we'll never keep up with the cycle. The requirements and demands in India were completely different. Imagine offering education in a rural part of the country virtually, but at 20 rupees per month per student. We have been innovating to get it down to that level. A medical subscription. So Dr. Devi Shetty did a project with us where his doctor's sitting in Bangalore, treating patients in some other part of the country, 10 rupees per prescription, and not just about checking whether you have cold or flu and giving some medicines, but really about doing ECGs, predicting are you going to have a heart attack or not, right, over time, looking at your blood sugar levels, what you should be doing. So that kind of innovation, deep innovation. The second was the startup ecosystem in India is fantastic, right? You have to leverage the power of that. We open innovation centers, we bring them in, we co-create. Also co-creating with our customers, because if you can't help them solve real issues, then you will have a challenge. You won't show value to your clients over time, right? And amplification through the ecosystem. We started to realize that if we did everything, we're not going to be able to scale. And so creating an ecosystem where, and I'll tell you here, use technology, leverage on the power of digitization. We have an ecosystem of 2,500 very good partners. 16,000 people sit in those organizations. Between my team and between our partners, 16,000, if Cisco announces a new product this evening, we will have them trained in the next 24 hours. And any organization, I can tell you, that can skill their people very quickly, that's why I call this rapid skilling. If you have the right platform, it's a huge winner. But that's something we used. Last but not the least, I think as leaders, we have to think about we have to listen, we have to be very closely connected to our customers, but we have to have a sense of paranoia every day. And taking from Rajiv's cue, it has to be healthy paranoia. Don't have sleepless nights over it, but if you're not paranoid as a leader, and if you're not thinking all the time on what are the changes you should be making, what are the businesses you should be betting on, I think you're going to struggle. So our journey continues. I can tell you in India, the journey has been fabulous with the work in smart cities, in education, in helping our companies digitize. But it's an interesting journey because it changes almost every day. That's the speed at which things are happening. But if you got these 4 or 5 business fundamentals right, it doesn't matter what happens in the market or what the external factors are that you can never control. I think you'll always be ahead of the curve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. Well, a lot of common themes there. From where Rajiv left off, Dinesh has taken the conversation forward. The challenges of not being commoditized and continuing to disrupt yourself before you're disrupted by somebody else. And I think really anticipating the changes in the marketplace and how do you do that, the mechanisms for being able to do that, I think that's going to be something that we will talk about as well. Rishad, over to you.
So, I was warned before coming to this session that, Rajiv is going to talk about yoga or homeopathy and he's going to make you look dull. And that's, I've got a few comments to make, which I'm going to make, and they're going to be sort of more mainstream, but I'm going to go with it. And then we can hopefully open it up to a different conversation as well. Look, I think the quantum of change in technology is happening faster and it's becoming more and more real. And if there's ever a time for organizations in the technology industry, in the IT services industry to be bold in India, it is now, right? You add that change in technology with just the uncertainty that is building, the uncertainty around the outcome of the elections, both with Brexit or the US elections. You add shareholder activism on top of that. You add the issue of mobility. And so you're adding a whole different level of complexity that organizations are now having to deal with on top of the very fundamental change that's happening in technology. And I'm of the strong belief that the human mind was not built to deal with this level of complexity and to be able to process it and to be able to come up with outcomes that make sense. So it really becomes the need for organizations to then design themselves in a manner in which they can deal with this and really have a system that enables that. And so I think the first really important thing for an organization to think about is how do you create and maintain a level of flexibility inside the company to be able to react. And to me, that is the essence of simplicity. How can you react to situations on the fly? And in an organization as large as ours, one of the things we sort of focus on very, very hard is even though we're quite layered, how do you break hierarchy? How do you sort of allow fluid flow of information from top to down very, very quickly? And it's things like that that enabled us, as an example, we did a large acquisition about 3 months ago of a cloud application company. It was the second largest acquisition for us as a company where we spent $500 million. And we did that from the time of meeting the CEO to the time of signing it in 4 weeks, which for us I think is quite fast. And we were able to do that because we were able to sort of declutter and share information all the way down from the finance analyst who's working on the diligence to the chairman of the company and to the board as well. So I think that becomes an important element of how do you create this flexibility and maintain this flexibility in the organization. The second important thing I think is how do you make sure that stable businesses and dynamic businesses can coexist inside a company. And it's easier said than done, because when stable businesses are the cash cow, it becomes quite hard to change and move into these dynamic businesses. And as a company, I think you've got to think about a very different way of measuring and thinking about these dynamic businesses. What kind of metrics do you look at for these companies? What is the learning curve that you think about for these companies? How do you incentivize people? And, as an example, we've set up a small fund called Wipro Ventures about 24 months ago. The main measure there is POCs. We're not looking to measure order booking or revenue on scale yet. We're saying how many customers are we taking these interesting companies into? And that's the main measure for the teams. How many proof of concepts are converting into pilots? That's the main focus for that organization. So really, how do you ensure dynamic and stable businesses coexist? The third is really how do you create a playground where you can experiment, and rapid experimentation. We try and do that to 3 or 4 different mechanisms, through our technology office, which is allowed to play with products, through a funding mechanism, which we have called Horizon 2, Horizon 3, where we're funding ideas to encourage internal entrepreneurship, which can pay off in 6 to 8 quarters. But really, sort of how do you focus on just experimenting, but very quickly moving into big and bold bets around this if they pay off. So play extensively, but convert very, very quickly into ideas that can pay off, and then make those bold bets. The thing we worry most about is when an organization like us, an industry like us, can see the change, and it's going to happen, but can't make the pivot fast enough because you're too large, you're too complex, you're too bureaucratic. And that's the big journey we're on. How do we make that pivot quickly enough while we know it's happening and we can see it coming?
Thanks very much, Rishad. So now it's down to the Q&A. And I think let me pick up on the common theme. And I think that's going to be interesting for people to take insights away from here as well. From what I heard Rajiv say, what I heard Rishad just say, and what I heard Dinesh say, a lot of the problems that CEOs face is, you've got these stable businesses, you've got the cash cow running, you anticipate the change, whether it's regulatory change or it's the demand environment changing, and yet being able to make that bet, pivoting fast enough. How do you ensure that you're protecting your future while not protecting your past? Rajiv, how important was that for you? Because clearly your strategy was not to protect the scooter business, but was to move away from the scooter business because that's what you were betting on in the future.
See, I'm going to quote Mark Twain, because Mark Twain said, never let your schooling interfere with your education. So I tell my people, don't let your business interfere with your entrepreneurship. Because a businessman only wants to scale up something, but the entrepreneur wants to create new things, new categories, new segments, new technologies, new benefits. And I think that is very, very important, because if we are not creating the future, then at some point, I think Dinesh very correctly used that word, commoditization, will threaten the business. And, again, I'll share with you what the marketing guru Al Ries said. He said the job of the CEO is to create the future from the current activities. So I think the problem very often today is either the CEO doesn't want to create the future, or if he wants to create it, he wants to disengage from the current skill structure and cost structure and do something completely new. This is very common in India, where every businessman thinks that there's Midas touch. Just because he's making cars, he can make software. Just because he's making salt, he can make steel, and all this kind of stuff happens. So this is a sign of a developing economy, where you talk global, but actually you want to stay local and in every possible segment, because you can leverage your network here. But I think, like any chef, like any artist, like any sports person, if you want to be truly global, then we must understand that we have to narrow our product portfolio if we want to widen the markets to which we must appeal. And in this process, I think what works most against us is our intuition. Because intuitively, we always think more is more. And the best example of more is more is the Swiss penknife. Because it is one tool in which you can find 30 tools. But actually, you also know, everybody buys that Swiss Victorinox, but nobody uses it. Because finally, when you want to use something, you pick up a knife or a scissor or a tweezer or something. So sales is about more is more. Marketing is about less is more. Do one thing well, keep it narrow and keep it deep. I think if we develop that mentality, we can create the future.
Rishad, just to take that point forward, I think one of the problems facing the Indian IT industry at this point in time, and it's an existential issue as well, beyond what Trump and Brexit and all of that mean, is it's largely become a commoditized business. It is about price advantage, it's about low-cost arbitrage, and the low-cost arbitrage doesn't necessarily exist in the manner which it did a couple of years ago. In that situation now, how important is specialization going to be? I mean, the FMCG world is talking about premiumization. How important is it going to be for the Indian IT industry to find those niches, to find those pockets of areas of specialization, which will then allow you to get pricing premium as well?
Yeah, so, I just want to comment, certainly there's more pricing competitiveness, and I want to use that word carefully, before we get to commoditization in the traditional run business. But I still think there's a lot of runway, and opportunity around how you deliver with automation and how you play a differentiated story with automation in that space as well. But look, I think it certainly will come down to the big, bold bets that you're able to make to drive a differentiated story going forward, whether it be around the whole digital story, around the whole cloud story.
Digital is the story that you're betting on, and you've done that by way of inorganic growth. You've done a bunch of acquisitions. In fact, you've been perhaps most acquisitive amongst your peers.
Correct.
So digital via M&A, that's the big bet for you.
Well, I think M&A is an important tool, because I think M&A helps you very disruptively break perceptions that have existed in the past, right? One perception could have been about cost, quality, and scale, and how do you change that and pivot from that perception? And that's one way certainly to do it, I think, but it requires continued, sustained efforts, and the reality is that it will be bumpy, because as the run business sort of slows down and the change business sort of picks up, it's not going to be completely synchronized. But I think there's huge opportunity, and if you are not going to be making clear choices today, you may get left behind. The other thing I think will happen is you'll see divergence between people that win and people that lose based on the bets that they make.
Since you're talking about this delicate balance between the run business and the change business, how important is it for you to be able to communicate this to the markets? And you talked about shareholder activism. We're seeing this not so much in India, but we're seeing this play out globally as well. When you're being assessed and evaluated quarter on quarter to the last decimal point, are you going to be able to do 22% margins, 22.4% margins, and so on and so forth? How delicate is this for you to be able to communicate to investors that this is a long-term bet? It's not going to show results maybe in the next 2 or 3 quarters, but maybe 12 or 18 months down the line?
I think really we give much less credit to investors than is due. I think if you are able to communicate very clearly to investors in the path and journey that you're on, they can be patient with you if they believe you, and if they see certain clear sort of markers that show progress towards that destination. So, I don't worry, and I think we should worry less about sort of this challenge and this contradiction between short-term and long-term investments, because I don't think there needs to be one if you're able to have the conversation very, very clearly of what journey you're on and where you're making investments and how that will pay off over time.
Dinesh, I'll come back to you in just a second, but I just want to get Rajiv to comment on this. Rajiv, you face a lot of questions around the fact that, look, the scooter market in India is growing. Why aren't you getting back into the scooter market? This was a market that you dominated and so on and so forth. You've stayed clear so far of the scooter market. How do you respond to people when they say that, why is this a market that you're not going after?
See, I think people say this to us because they assume that a two-wheeler is a two-wheeler. So if you're making a motorcycle, why not also make a scooter? It again comes from the same sales mentality of more is more. And I tell them this is like saying to Sachin Tendulkar that he should play baseball because that is about a bat and ball also. So what's the difference between baseball and cricket? It doesn't work like that because when you are wanting to be a global company, I mean, look at someone like Gillette, for example, something that all of us are familiar with because it's the best that a man can get. At least at our age, it's the best that a man can get. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is Gillette apparently today has 60% global market share in what it does. It is synonymous with that. When you think of a burger, you don't go to Pizza Hut. When you think of pizzas, you don't go to McDonald's. So business is more about perception than reality. When a customer walks into my dealership, for me, the most important person in the company is neither the watchman nor the chairman. It's the salesman at the dealership. He has to answer to the customer, why mine? He has to be able to stand up and say, please buy mine because the whole world is buying mine. Because the fact of the matter is we all buy what other people buy. I mean, we don't have the guts to make and the wisdom to make such a very reasoned and wise choice. I buy this because Rishad buys it and he buys it because Shereen buys it. So well, in a manner of speaking only. So I'm saying that in life we should climb only one mountain at a time. If there comes a time when Bajaj has 30, we have only 10% global motorcycle market share. Should I try to move in the motorcycle segment, which is 35 million vehicles worldwide, from 10% to 15, 20, 25, 30, where I have tailwinds? Or should I try and address the scooter segment, where we are zero, and try and build it up from there and build a presence? I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. But the problem is, again, these management concepts like reimagine and re-engineer. Because I'm told you should reimagine this. So my answer is this, that, I'm always told by media people, by analysts, that this is called de-risking. That scooter bhi hoga, motorcycle bhi hoga, to ye nahi chalega, to ye chalega. This is not de-risking. This is gambling. This is playing darts. This is distraction. And this is fragmentation of resources. I mean, at the end of the day, you must be like Arjun and you must believe you can see the eye of the bird and you must go for it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At least you gave it the best shot. So that's what I...
So Dinesh, I want to, again, picking up on the thread that we were just having and picking up on what you said on anticipating the big trends and the big mega trends that you at Cisco were able to spot specifically with regards to the India market and how you then changed course within the company and so on and so forth. How do you ensure that you don't get distracted, especially in an environment where the government one day is telling you make in India, the second day it's telling you digital India, the third day it's telling you smart cities and so on and so forth? How do you ensure that you don't get distracted and you make the right choices, you make the right bets?
So I think, Shereen, firstly, we basically have, one simple tendency. Every time you see the next shiny toy, you start to run in that direction. And I think that's why I said it was not about big speeches that were being made or, we started having very different conversations with our customers. And you have to take a very large sample size to have those discussions. You also have to look at the fact that in any market, for that matter, when so many people are moving from, let's say, rural to urban, that's not driven by the government. That's not driven. It's just natural. People are looking for better lives. Now, what happens when they show up? So you have to logically start analyzing, what are some of the patterns, talk to your customers, and then make certain decisions. and big bets. If you just think of a new idea, listen to a speech, or go read a very fancy book, or look at some proverb and make a decision, that is chasing the next shiny toy, and we completely avoided that. Sometimes in our business, we would take 6 months before we would make that one big bet. And when you take the big bet, I love the example he gave about, then you go after it wholeheartedly. The problem was the P&L, because you have to think about today, and
While you're thinking about tomorrow.
yeah, and how do you extract resources? In fact, I'll give you an example. In our business, the minute we started taking resources out of today's business, there was a lot of uncomfortable feeling, because people said, oh, you know, these are all the people that are not doing well in the business, so you're creating a new role for them, right? But I think you have to put the stake in the ground. If you've done your homework well, if you've taken time, had deep conversations with customers, I think 9 out of 10 times you will get it right.
Rishad, did you face some of the same issues that Dinesh just talked about?
Yeah, but they're a product business as well, and I think it matters a little bit. We have the philosophy of rapid experimentation. So how can you try out many, many different things very quickly before you zone in
if
on...
need be, yeah.
Right, 3-6 months and sort of experiment with different ideas before you zone into one. So, I'm personally a big believer in the opportunity to experiment and then zone in.
Okay. Experiment and then zone in. I'm going to throw this open to the audience. So if you could raise your hands, we'll get a microphone across to you. If you can tell me who you would like the question addressed to, we'll get an answer from the specific person. Oh, the question's on the screen. Okay, sorry, I'm not that tech savvy. How do you incentivize employees in the stable business while hype and allure of the dynamic business is more exciting? Okay, it doesn't say who you would like that answered by, so I'll toss this to Rishad, because he spoke about the run and the change business. How do you incentivize employees in the stable business while the hype and allure of the dynamic business is more exciting, Rishad?
I think, it's very important not to create this poor cousin feel to the stable business. And the reality is that that is the cash cow, that is the business that's actually going to fund your future. So we are very, very focused that we don't bring in companies that we buy, leadership that we bring in on the dynamic side that look down upon the stable business, right? We also sort of very articulately and transparently, I think, share that there are different sets of people with different skill sets that have a different sort of compensation construct than you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be more or less, it's just different. So the mindset of not looking down and having teams that don't look down upon the old is very, very important, I think.
Okay. Rajiv, this one's for you. When are we going to see a Bajaj car on Indian roads?
Sorry, what?
When are we going to see a Bajaj car on Indian roads?
Oh, we are not a car maker. In fact, our position as a company is that we are a anti-car company, because we feel that people should either walk, cycle, use two-wheelers or three-wheelers. Because cars are too big, too fast, they pollute, they congest, and they kill all of us because they run over us. Yeah, because people say that two-wheelers are dangerous. My submission is two-wheelers are dangerous only when hit by a car, otherwise they are not dangerous. Seriously, that's why so many cities in Europe, for example, are becoming carless, because it's safer to walk, cycle, etc., use the metro, whatever. Having said that, more seriously, we are the world's largest three-wheeler maker, and we export more than we sell in this market. And, ever since I was in school, people would make fun of me saying, ki, ye kaisa gaadi banate ho, 3 wheels, no doors, ye nahi hai, wo nahi hai, and all that. So one day I sat down with my guys and I said, look, we have to make something that is a little more respect-worthy. So we said to us, this is the difference between business and entrepreneurship. So, because entrepreneurship mein naam kamate, business mein to khali paisa kamate. So we said the best three-wheeler would be a four-wheeler. It should have 4 wheels, it should have a seat belt, it should have a hard roof, it should have 4 doors, all the kind of things that car people take for granted. But the poor auto guy, as a driver or a passenger, thinks of it as a luxury. So we created this category of vehicles called a quadricycle, as opposed to a three-wheeler, which is a tricycle. And we thought that, it's as obvious as daylight that this is better than that, because it was more fuel efficient, it was greener, it was safer, it was more comfortable. Now today, after 5 years of having done this, you may or may not be surprised to know that we are today exporting to countries in Asia, to Europe, for example, to Russia, to Turkey, to LATAM. This is the only country that has not given us permission to sell this vehicle. because for some reason it thinks that a four-wheeler is worse, and let people continue on three-wheelers. So what I want to say, because there's a question on innovation before this question, I want to say one thing very seriously to all of you, that if your innovation in this country depends on government approval or the judiciary process, it will not be a case of made in India, it will be a case of mad in India. You know? After 5 years, we are still waiting for permission to sell our four-wheeler in this country.
Okay, so make in India to mad in India. Let me take the innovation question forward then with you, Dinesh. But you want to talk about some of the challenges that he just spoke of, regulatory challenges in India, the ease of doing business in India, IPR issues in India, if any. I mean, I'm not in the camp, and we just had the US Chamber of Commerce put out a report ranking India at the bottom again of the IPR index, and I think that's wrong because whether it's with compulsory licensing or other IPR related issues, I don't think India has such a bad track record. But on the ground, what are the challenges that you face as you innovate?
So I sit in the very optimistic camp because honestly, I look at growth and progress. In the last 3 years, let's face it, we started on a journey on digitization. India is far ahead of any other country in the world. I can tell you we should feel proud about it. When 4 Indians join the internet every second, this group of people should feel great about it. Call it regulatory, call it whatever you want. When the world's largest end-to-end IP network, the only one got created, and yesterday you had the CEO of that company talk about it, we should feel proud about it. So I think from my standpoint, yes, there have been regulatory challenges and other things, but I think in general, the way things have been trending have actually been amazing, right? Look at the work in smart cities. Today, of course, it takes time. So there was a vision drawn out 3 years ago. But the number of active projects going on in India far outweighs what is happening in any other part of the world. And there is a reason why our economy is where it is. So clearly there are challenges, but I tend to be a little bit more on the optimistic side where things are trending in the right direction. And I'll tell you, that is why we also decided to make in India. We are opening a factory in Pune, in Ranjangaon. Our first set of products, which are complex by the way, 20,000 chips on that one little PCB will come out of India in March. And we should all feel good about that because 3 years ago, that was not possible.
Absolutely, we most certainly should. Rishad, let me put this question to you. With companies like Apple moving from the PC to music to phones to watches to cars successfully, we don't know successfully just yet on the cars specifically, how important is it to stay focused in your domain?
Yeah, we're of the school of thought, if you know the history of Wipro, we were actually quite a diversified company in 3 or 4 different areas, from the consumer product business to infrastructure engineering, where we make hydraulic cylinders that go into tractors, excavators, to a partnership on the healthcare side with GE, to the IT business. And we've separated those businesses out because we really believe in strong focus. So we will look at adjacencies, but not fundamentally getting out of the technology business, at least as a part of Wipro Limited.
Okay, but on this issue of moving away from the many businesses that you operated in, and I think Rajiv made comments to, can you be a salt to software conglomerate, and it comes back to the choices that you need to make and the art of sacrifice in the corner office. This need to then sort of re-engineer yourself and say, we want to be just a software company. And it took a long time for you to be able to do that.
Yeah. So let me just qualify that. The reality is you can have different businesses that coexist inside a large organization as long as they're completely independently run, not staff for resources, not cross-funding across different companies, not cross-funding management bandwidth and leadership time. You can have those exist, right? I think though, we believe that it's important to sort of stay focused and not diversify beyond a certain point because there's only so much bandwidth at a leadership level that you can give to more businesses without making
so keep it simple. Okay, Dinesh, this one is for you. Can you explain to us a little bit more about how you dealt with the P&L pressure, especially the pressures from a quarterly perspective?
Yeah, so I think that's just reality. And to be honest with you, it's probably one of the more harder decisions you make on a daily basis. But I think this is where it came down to how we also restructure and reorganize ourselves, right? First is if you think you can do everything by yourself, it's a very expensive model. We have an amazing set of partners. We went on this journey to say we want partners in every nook and corner. We train them just the way we train our people. All the best practices we use within Cisco at India, we go and share that with our partner community. And I think it's the combination of the two that helped us navigate that tough situation where you are basically getting zero out of the new initiatives and your current business is funding everything. So I think that was one we used. The second was in the power of teams. If you can take small teams, people used to come and say to me that, I have 50 people in my team. The first thing that would come to my mind is, that's a little inefficient. We moved to the model of small teams, all interconnected together, and then you start redeploying them. If you're agile enough, I think you can navigate through some of the P&L pressures that you have. But it was about people, it was about partners, and also innovating, using the startup ecosystem, using your customers and partners as well, so you stay ahead of the curve. These were three things that come to mind around being able to keep your current business, but not letting it drag you down. And I'll tell you, it's very natural to protect your base. You tend to not innovate fast enough.
Okay, I think we've pretty much come to the end of our session, so let me get wrap-up comments from each of you. And Rajiv, let me start by asking you, forget reimagining, re-engineering. Where do you see yourself 5 years down the line? Where do you see Bajaj Auto 5 years down the line? Where do you see India 5 years down the line?
No, I don't know about India. This is not my job. I share with you a new initiative we have on our mind. We think, like most automakers do, that the cities of our world need a better automotive solution for transportation of people, for first mile, last mile, etc. And we think that we are one of the companies that is very well positioned, given our cost structure, given our skills with making small vehicles, to innovate something in this space, to create a new kind of urban mobility, as we like to call it, which is chic, which is very green and valid for the future. So hopefully we are following the advice of Dinesh. We are looking at the trend correctly, and we are going to learn fast and skill fast and move in that direction. So that's one specific thing we are trying to do for the future.
Okay. Rishad, 5 years down the line.
I think the technology industry is not for the faint-hearted, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunity, but a lot of risk. And I think, being decisive and clear in terms of choices you make today, I think will pay dividend over the next few years.
Do you see the Indian IT industry, the landscape that we've gotten used to and accustomed to over the past several years, changing significantly given all the uncertainty and the disruption?
I think it'll present new opportunities. I mean, you look back historically, and people said that after Y2K, people said that after the ERP story, people said that after the BPO story or the infrastructure story. So I'm very optimistic about the ability to innovate and to sort of stay ahead of the curve.
Okay. Dinesh?
So, Shereen, I see in 5 years a very different India. I see an India where people will live, work, and play in a very digital world. I see a lot of the problems of India getting solved by digitization. And I see us as Cisco, I see NASSCOM, I see this IT industry having to play a huge role in that, and I'm sure we will.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, ideas with us. I think the biggest takeaway for me personally from the conversation that I've had here this morning is that the focus really has to be on your ability to make changes, your ability to adapt, and your ability to know very clearly what you want to go after. I think the rest of it can be addressed and dealt with, but to be clear about what you stand for, what you believe in, and what you would like to go after, I think will answer a lot of the problems and a lot of the challenges that we see this sector facing today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being a great audience. Thanks very much indeed.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Brilliant insights from the CEO panel, from juxtaposing homeopathy and yoga to management insights to running changing businesses. All of it happening here. As a token of our appreciation, I'd like to request Shereen to hand over mementos to all of our panelists. Thank you, Rishad, Rajiv, and Dinesh. And Shereen, thank you so much. You're always our favorite moderator here. So. With that, ladies and gentlemen, that was the close of the CEO discussion, Simplify to Amplify. We're now moving into the next segment.